So something that a lot of Frost mages, especially now, get confused about is when to run Freezing Rain over Splain Ice and how that build works. So I'm going to go over when to run it and the choices you have for builds during this video. To start, I'm just going to show you the first pull of a Sanguine Depths. This is obviously the kind of biggest pull in a Sanguine Depths, and that's why Freezing Rain would have such an impact on here. I'm running Splain Ice in this. Unfortunately, I had a key that was 24 Sanguine Depths. I deleted it because we didn't time it. I ran Freezing Rain there, but I'll show you the difference in DPS that it can do. Um, so yeah, your priority in AoE is also going to be slightly different if you're running Freezing Rain. So now we start bursting, right? And all you gotta do is cast Orb, you cast Blizzard. This is me running Splay Nice though, kind of doing not great damage, right? Doing 30k on this pack, which is not that much really when we have my Ellie Shaman. Okay, now I'm at 40k because we started getting Orb stacks, but yeah. If you were running Freezing Rain, you would have done more damage than the Yellow Shell on this pack, which would be about 80k. And if you lost it would be even more, or got PI, which this Ellie Shaman did get PI here. So, yeah. The main benefit to Freezing Rain is that it is way better at scaling at higher target counts. And realistically, you actually lose minimal single target damage to run Freezing Rain because you only lose 5% Ice Lance damage on single target, which is kind of a lot, but I mean, it makes up for it being that you do so much more damage in uncapped AoE. So the when to use Freezing Rain depends a lot on how your tank pulls, and you're gonna have to make this decision for yourself. Obviously, running it on Tyrannical versus Fortified Weeks is different. Honestly, a lot of people would recommend you don't run it on Tyrannical Weeks, but Tyrannical Weeks are some of the best weeks to run Freezing Rain because you're doing such huge pulls. You would probably run a different build though, and I'll talk about the builds a little later, especially in terms of conduits slash soulbinds. But the main differentiator, the main thing that's going to tell you whether you want Freezing Rain or not is your tank. How big do they pull? And then in what dungeons do they do that? For instance, my tank pulls like 4 packs of Star Sanguine Depths every time we do it. That's great for Freezing Rain. And he continues to pull big throughout the entire dungeon. So Sanguine Depths is actually a relatively good Freezing Rain dungeon for me when I run with my tank. Same with Necrotic Wake. He likes to do huge pulls there. So those two things are big, but you will, as a general rule, never run Freezing Rain in top. And there's, of course, some other dungeons, but it really just, as I said, depends a lot on how your tank's pathing works out. If you're running with one that you are in a pre-made group with and you know how they're going to pull. If you're running with a pug, I generally recommend not doing Freezing Rain, especially in lower keys. Freezing Rain isn't as worth it because people just pull less and they tend to die a lot faster. So. Going over the build now, as you can see I'm Venthyr, and that's mainly because most of you will be Venthyr right now. Um, but what you will most likely already be running is Theotar with Unrelenting Cold, Splain Ice, and you'll have your Icy Propulsion and Enhanced Conduit slot. That's totally fine. It gives you more single target damage. You would lose a lot more single target damage if you decide to drop your Ice Bite for Shivering Core. That is far more overall, probably in the realm of 400 to 600 more overall, if not more, because Blizzard does a fuck ton of damage with Freezing Rain, but you do lose single target damage, you do lose priority damage, so you might not want to do it. If any of you watched the MDI, you might have noticed that some of their mages were actually running Nadia, and the reason for that is if you run Nadia, it's kind of helps you with Freezing Rain. Haste scales really well with you, obviously, because it reduces your Blizzard cooldown, and Fatal Flaw, which is the end trait of Nadia, the 20% increased crit, which you will have because you definitely don't have enough verse to make that your primary, scales very well with Freezing Rain and AoE as well. So Nadia, if you're continually doing a lot of big pulls, is definitely what I would recommend in higher keys as opposed to Theotar. Let's talk about kind of the major cons that running Freezing Rain brings, and obviously the big one that a lot of people can tell you is that it has less single target damage. That's pretty bland, and you already know that, and it's not too important. It really depends on your comp and what else everyone else brings, and that's something that you'll have to decide for yourself because it does bring less priority too in bigger pools. Um, but still, you know, that's fine. You do way more AoE. So once again, that was highlighted a little earlier in here. Lower icy veins uptime, and this matters in dungeons that have a variety of smaller poles in between the large poles. Because you're not running splitting ice, you get less crits, right? Because you're not hitting 2 targets with every ice lance, you're only hitting 1. Um, so you literally just, your icy veins might not be up. You might not get 100% uptime on it on 2 targets like you would have with splitting ice. You might not get 100% uptime on it with 3 targets like you would with splitting ice. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's one big reason to change your icy veins timing a decent amount when you're running it. So it is also very dependent on positioning, because unlike splitting ice, your main damage in each AoE pole is not coming from your ice lances, it's coming from your frozen orb and your blizzard. Whereas previously in splitting ice, it would just be kind of ice lance and frozen orb to a lesser extent, because you can't get your blizzards up instantly every time they fade like you can with freezing rain. So yeah. Let's talk about covenant choices a little bit. I kind of highlighted the Venthyr build here, but I wanted to talk about how the other Covenant abilities interact with Freezing Rain in Mythic Plus, or even just in general. Night Fae, in my opinion, is only worth it with Freezing Rain. With Uncapped Frozen Orb, that might change that, you know, it's valuable enough to get more Frozen Orbs off, that it's worth kind of the single target loss that losing Venthyr does. But really, since you're always running freezing winds, even with freezing rain, then you're just sending out orbs that are gonna stop you from using your legendary for a while anyway. So it's kind of iffy. But Night Phase pretty good. I'd recommend running it if you're running freezing rain. It's very good with that. Um, Necrolord is viable in my opinion. It's very strong. It's gonna be even stronger in 9.1.5, which is mainly talking about because no one's gonna swap Necrolord now. Um, and you would run the Gift of the Lich conduit, because that it's going to be 20 seconds increased time on your thing. But it's especially viable in Mist, and the reason for that is you can't, at least as Venthyr, use your ability during Ingra's Burn, but with Necrolord you can. And I've fiddled around with some Necrolord Frost, and I've done very large damage, especially in Mist. So I'd recommend giving that a try once 9.1.5 comes out. And then the last thing to mention is the rotational changes that come when you run Freezing Rain. Um, no matter what, you want to cast Blizzard on cooldown. Okay, that's the big thing. So just if you're 1 second off your Blizzard coming off cooldown, don't cast anything, just cast it on cooldown. And also gain your Frozen Orbs off on cooldown as well. And then the difference in AoE priority is at 6+ targets, you'd want to start casting Arcane Explosion instead of Ice Lance, whereas at Splay Ice, that change occurs at around 12 targets if you're going for like kind of pad AoE. So yeah,